I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. Today on the Prosecutors, we continue our investigation into the real Amityville horror. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, with my haunting co-host, Alice.
Thank you, Brett. That was so thematic.
I know, wasn't it?
So
it fits
thematic.
with the theme.
I love it. I love it. You know, this is really good because I've been trying to think of what to do for Halloween in this age of COVID. Like, I don't want to be caught off guard and not have a costume for, matching costume for my family. But if no one's going to come by or we're not going to go anywhere, what's the point, If you have matching costumes and no one sees you, did you really have a costume?
That's a really good point. 2020 kind of sucks. I mean, I'm still recording from this hotel room. Dedication to the podcast notwithstanding, there's a hurricane going on right now to add to everything else. The West Coast is on fire. I don't know. I had a dream last night that the world ended. So
is it a dream?
I don't know. The sun just stopped burning, which seems like something that could happen this year.
I mean, Brett, this is insane. This is insane. You are okay. Let's just set the scene for everybody. Earlier today, I had to drive you through a hurricane, quite literally a hurricane, to your hotel room where you are sheltering in place with your sweet family who has been displaced from your home, which has a hole through it. I think it's getting fixed. And then I had to, drive home in the hurricane, and now we're all hunkered down because there is a hurricane sitting on top of us right now.
Yeah. And my wife and my wonderful child are in the other room. So if you hear crying at some point, I'm not torturing any babies. That's what I live with these days. In fact, I think I just heard
there
her.
She is. I was gonna say there she is. It's almost on cue. She is good. She knows her stage cues.
It's a family podcast.
and this is a positive update. So recently, my husband and I had an anniversary, and do you know what he got me for our anniversary? This is a very
This
sweet
is my
present.
kind of man.
No, he did not get me a blender. That's like straight out of Father of the Bride, the movie. He got me podcast gear, like podcast equipment. I mean, how sweet is that? So naturally, at my anniversary dinner, I texted Brett and said, my husband got you, Brett, an anniversary present.
I was so thankful, too. Like, I didn't expect anything.
It was really kind. So thank you, husband. It was very sweet of him. And you know how he said how he found out what I needed? I really am recording in my closet. He peeked in underneath the door while I was recording one time to check out what gear I was missing. Which is super creepy, by the way, but
I think it's sweet. Alice, your whole family is contributing to this podcast. Your brother bought a microphone. Now your husband's buying other gear. I mean, this is great.
I mean, they are our biggest patrons. They're really paying for our hobby. Which brings us
Speaking of patrons.
We didn't plan that. We're just that
we
good.
Didn't, but that's a great transition. So we finally got a Patreon page. We've always said we're not going to ask you for money. We're not asking you for money, but a lot of you had asked if you could support the show, and we kept saying no, and people kept asking. So finally, we just decided, hey, let's just do this thing and see what happens. And we've actually had a lot more people who want to. And in the Patreon page, it says you will get nothing for supporting our show. And yet people are supporting the show. So now we've got to come up with things to do because I feel bad.
Well, can I, the first time, so I'm just not, savvy in the podcast world, so I'd never heard of Patreon. And when Brett explained what Patreon was to me, I literally said to him, who the heck would do that? Who would give us money? And you guys just came out of the woodwork within like the hour.
You guys are just so much better people than Alice. I don't know what else to say.
Now I feel bad.
But yeah, I think a couple things we're going to do. Number one, if you're a patron and you want to hear an episode, you're going to the top of the list. So those of you who've been sending us suggestions, we are not above bribes. So feel free to bribe us. And then we're also going to start doing some Patreon only get vocals. So we can talk about some cases with you folks and really kind of go in depth. So if you want to be a part of that, join up. We don't have any tiers or anything. So literally, you can be a $1 patron and take part in all that stuff too. So
we love you just as much.
We do. And you know what? If you're leaving reviews, that's just as good. Don't feel like you have to spend any money on us. And thank you guys for all the reviews you have been leaving. A lot of those reviews talk about how you like this podcast because we don't spend like 10 minutes at the beginning of the show talking about random things. So sorry about that today because we've kind of done that. But we'll go ahead and move on into the show. Today we're finishing up our discussion of the Amityville horror. Hope you guys have been enjoying it so far, and I hope you've learned some things you didn't know before about this most famous of American hauntings. We're going to finish up talking about the case, talking about the murders that came before the hauntings, and then we're going to talk briefly about the haunting itself. So you're going to hear some theories on what we think happened in the house during the murders, and then you'll hear some theories about what we think happened as far as the haunting itself. So let's dive right back in. As we left you last time, we were talking about whether or not there are two gunmen in this case, and that's something that's going to be coming up again and again and again. One thing, when we get into the theories, we're going to talk about whether or not Dawn, the oldest sister in the family, was involved in the murders. And one thing we wanted to start off with today is something about a report made by an anonymous DEA agent. Now, we don't know exactly who this guy is. We don't know if he's legit at all. But we do know there was a lot of drug activity going on in this house. So it would not be surprising if DEA was involved in some way or another. A respected reporter who was working on this case was contacted by a DEA agent who claimed that he was actually conducting surveillance on the house the night of the murders, and he witnessed someone matching Dawn's description leaving the house that night with a hooded jacket, wearing black gloves, and carrying a rifle. And the agent claimed that he watched Dawn walk around back to the water and throw the rifle into the bay, and the police would later find the weapon in that location. Now, why this is particularly interesting, you may recall one of the stories that Butch Defeo told when he described how he murdered his family was that he was in the midst of this heroin stupor, and a faceless woman, hooded and cloaked in black, with black hands, came out and gave him the rifle that he would use in the murder. If you believe this DEA agent, and you believe this is true, then you have to wonder, was Dawn somehow manipulating Butch? Was she convincing him that something demonic was going on so that she could use him to eliminate the rest of her family? It's an interesting question. A couple things I would point out. Number one, anonymous sources are anonymous, and it's hard to check those. So it's hard to know whether or not it's true.
Brett, that was my question. Was there ever any confirmation that this was in fact a DEA agent, or did they simply claim that they were a DEA agent?
They simply claimed they were a DEA agent. The reporter in question gave this a lot of credence, which kind of surprised me. I am inclined to think this is somebody who heard Butch's story and kind of came up with this to corroborate it. And one big reason for that, if Dawn threw the rifle in the bay, how did Dawn end up getting shot by the rifle? Not really sure how that works out. So you'd have to assume there's another weapon. And, kind of going back to Occam's razor, I don't love Occam's razor. I think people lean on it too much. You'll cut yourself if you do that. But you got to wonder how many people and guns and everything else are we going to add to this case. You also have to believe that this DEA agent is sitting outside the house surveilling it and somehow misses all these gunshots, because he doesn't mention that either.
And here's very questionable to me. DEA, if they are in fact surveilling this house, it means they have an open investigation on it, and they can make this sort of report within their own open investigation. Why would they contact a reporter who's not even law enforcement to report something that would be privileged, private, investigatory information? It just doesn't make any sense, because you would think that this investigation would be ongoing, or they would pass it along to their fellow law enforcement officers who are looking into this case. So it just doesn't, it's just strange.
And you got to think, Butch is a small-time dealer at best. It's not like he's some sort of kingpin. There's no reason they would hide it. I think you're exactly right. If they were surveilling the location, they would make that report.
Right. And the DEA, meaning like a federal agent, would just have more resources than a local reporter who's working on this.
Yeah, so as intriguing as that story is, and as sort of evocative as it is, and as much as it sort of fits with the spooky lore of this case, I think we can probably go ahead and disregard that report.
Yeah. As sexy as it sounds, it just, none of it rings true to me. And it also just doesn't make sense if this DEA agent actually wanted this case solved, because this sounds like it would be a important piece of information that DEA could use, or DEA could pass on to law enforcement. With that, oh, and Brett, you said the police later found the weapon in the location that this supposed anonymous agent reported on. Is that true, that at first there was the tip, and then was the tip what made the police go look in that particular location in the bay?
No. That would be better for this
And,
story.
and well, there you go, and that's why I further question this, anonymous tip.
And it's a good point, because the reason they looked there is because that's where Butch told them that he threw the gun. So it doesn't really make sense for Dawn to have been the one who dumped the gun, and then Butch knows where it is. It doesn't really work. Wanted to talk about it because it's kind of
Right.
cool and it fits with what Butch said in one of his crazier stories, but doesn't actually work very well as a legitimate story.
I think what we've just done is what a lot of people say that we do, Brett. We are the cold water prosecutors. We pour cold water onto really sexy theories.
Yep. Unless it's an owl. We're gonna
Unless
knock
it's
it
an
out.
owl.
But you bring us an owl theory and we're all about it. So
So now kind of moving to those prosecutor angles. Motive. Now, we've said time and time again that you don't need a motive to win a case. But this is just such an insane story. When a son is convicted of killing his entire family, I think you need a motive. You really need to tell a story. So what was the motive here? He didn't just kill his parents. He killed his parents and all of his siblings, young siblings as well. During his early conversations with the police, Defeo asked what he needed to do to collect the $200,000 in life insurance, a life insurance policy that his father had taken out. And so the prosecution pointed to that as a possible motive at trial.
I just want to remind everybody, this is the 70s, so $200,000 is a lot of money. If I remember correctly, the house on the water with the boat dock and the multiple bedrooms was only like $80,000. So a $200,000 life insurance policy, when this case went down, that's a hefty motive.
Definitely. No, that's a lot of money. And also, like, poor judgment to ask about how to collect it, while you're talking to the police. And also, why would the police know how to collect insurance policies?
Yeah, not smart on Butch's part. I don't know if he was still... I mean, here's the thing. Probably what was actually happening is he was going through some withdrawals, and he needed another hit of the heroin, and that was the heroin talking. And the heroin's like, we need some money right now so we can go buy some heroin. And he does this really stupid thing that nobody in their right mind would do.
I think that's more likely. So now, of course, insurance fraud, life insurance policies, this is just not as sexy as devil worship, but it's more believable, particularly given what we talked about, Defeo's drug habit. And you guys may be thinking, okay, when you're high on drugs, maybe you can do a lot of crazy things, but really to fund his drug habit, he would kill his entire family. That's just not believable. But unfortunately, I think Brett and I have seen a lot of cases where that is the case. And I think, Brett, you actually have a case in mind, right?
Yeah, I had a death penalty case, and I've mentioned it sort of in passing before, but you had a situation where family, two kids, the son was like 19, 20. He had a daughter who was 21, 22. She was a nurse. The son was actually sort of in and out of college. You got this family. There's no indications of abuse. There's no indications of any kind of sexual abuse or anything like that. Any of the things that you might point to for sort of, I hate to say legitimate, but the kind of factor that you would see and why you might kill your parents. The father was, like a deacon in the church. I mean, by all accounts, this is like an upstanding family, but the son had become involved in drug use. In particular, he was on heroin. And he had regularly sort of been stealing from the family to pay for his drug use. And the father was trying to figure out a way to get him into rehab. And they had sort of an intervention type thing where they're like, we're worried about you. If you keep doing this, you're going to die and all this other stuff. Well, shortly after that, he got a gun. I mean, it's almost just like this. Shot both of the parents in their beds, and then like threw their bodies down the stairs into the basement, I guess to try and conceal the crime for a little bit longer. Stole a bunch of other stuff, went and pawned it all for a couple $1,000, and then went and bought a bunch of drugs and basically just went on a bender and used a couple $1,000s worth of drugs over the course of that weekend. It's surprising, frankly, that he didn't overdose and kill himself. And when the police found him, I mean, he was like, stereotypical high in a basement somewhere with a needle still in his arm, high on heroin. And it was, it was an open and shut case, frankly. And he was convicted and he was sentenced to death. He's still on death row at this time, but it was just one of those examples, kind of an eye-opening example, because
like all of that for just a couple $1,000s,
I know,
right? Not even to get rich, just to get his next high.
and in the abstract, it's hard for me to believe that someone would do that. You know what I mean? Like it's just hard to believe that somebody would do that. But I mean, this guy did it, and I saw it firsthand. And so when I see cases like this, you often hear people question, would they really do that? There must be more to it. There must be something else going on here. And I think that's one reason sort of the conspiracies and the devil worship and all that stuff is so attractive to folks. And in this case, you do have, I think, the added element of a violent family and a violent person. And then you put the drugs on top of that and you have a recipe for a disaster.
Absolutely. I mean, what do you think about the life insurance? Do you think he had planned it to get the life insurance, or maybe was it more like your case where he wanted the money, his dad said no, he got mad and killed him, and almost as an afterthought, it's like, oh yeah, I can get some money out of this?
Yeah, I think that's what happened. I mean, not to jump ahead to sort of our final conclusions on this, but I essentially think that his father was abusive. I think the relationship between him and his father was deteriorating more and more. There's the incident with the pool cue or the broomstick or whatever it was, and I think he kind of snapped, and I think he decided, I'm gonna kill this SOB, and I think the money was in the back of his mind. I think he knew if he just killed his father, number one, he's more likely to be caught. Number two, he's gonna have to split that money, and I think that's one of the reasons he probably killed his whole family.
Oof. Yeah, I don't disagree with you, but obviously the question is how, with someone who is so high and so under the influence, to be able to carry out this mass murder with no one hearing.
And maybe that's where the angry Indian chief comes in, like,
Let's talk about
let's
it.
talk about the
We
angry
went there.
Indian chief. We talked about this last time.
Can I point out that we've really evolved in our sophistication? No longer is our first theory just aliens now.
It's right. That's right. There you go. Look at us. We are
Look at us evolving and
we're becoming
growing.
more sophisticated in our storytelling.
I think it's just that we forgot to include aliens in this particular story.
Aliens are harder
That
to
was our
fit
bad.
into this one.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess
guess so.
aliens could have put some sort of beam over the house that prevented sound from getting out or something. I don't know why they would do
Ooh,
that,
that's a good one.
but
All
they could have.
right.
So there you
It
go.
was
It could be
aliens.
aliens. Could be aliens. But more likely, it was the angry Indian chief whose burial ground had been disrupted. You know, if you guys have seen Poltergeist, same thing, right? You don't build your house on a burial ground. That's just not a good thing to do. And you have Hans Holzer, who has this theory that this poor Indian chief, what was his name? He had a good name. Rolling Thunder. This Indian chief, Rolling
Oh,
Thunder.
that is. You know what? It's literally rolling thunder right now with this hurricane.
I know. It's as if the spirit of the Indian chief has heard us talking about him and has decided to wreak havoc, to seek revenge. But Rolling Thunder, he's buried on his horse. He's very happy being dead. And then all of a sudden he gets dug up and his skull gets crushed. And he's angry. Now, there's one problem with Holzer's theory. For reasons that I don't really know, he had decided this was a Shinnecock Indian chief. Well, the problem was it wasn't the Shinnecocks that occupied Long Island. It was the Montaukett Indians. And, it's possible he just got the wrong Indian chief, though you have to wonder if his research was so good and this Indian chief was really buried there and his grave was really disturbed and he really found out about that, why did he get the tribe wrong? I mean, that's an important thing, right? Now, it is not outside the realm of possibility that the house was built on an Indian burial ground. We don't actually have any reason to believe that. There's no proof of that. It's certainly not something that's been confirmed, but there have been several Native American burial grounds discovered in and around Amityville. So, not outside the realm of possibility, but as of today, no one has been able to prove definitively that the house itself is located on an Indian burial ground, whether it's the Shinnecocks or the Montauketts or anybody else.
So if you think that's out there, then we'll bring it something a little bit closer and I think more probable.
I think this is the first time we've ever had this theory. This is a new theory.
Yeah. And you're going to need to help me on this because I just don't know that much about mobs. And this brings us to the theory of the mob. So the Defeo family historically was deep in the mafia. Initially, Butch claims that the mob is the one who killed his family. How do you say the next word? Is it Capo regime?
Capo regime.
Kappa regime. Okay, Kappa regime.
You can just call him a capo.
Okay, thank you.
Capo works.
A capo.
You ever seen The
capo
Godfather?
regime.
I mean, come on, Alice.
I actually have not seen The Godfather, but I've seen movies that quote The Godfather, like You've Got Mail.
Let's see.
So not quite the same thing is
Not
what you're
quite.
saying. This is why I need your help, because I know nothing about the mob. Anyways, so Butch's great uncle, Pete Defeo, was a Capo
regime.
You got it. Okay. Dang it. Butch, second language. English is my second language. But Butch's great uncle, Pete Defeo, was a
capo.
Capo
Or a
regime.
capo.
A capo regime. Yeah, I'm going to get this right, okay? Pete Defeo was a capo regime in the Genovese crime family. This is one of the famed 5 families that control the New York underworld, and it was funded by Lucky Luciano. I feel like, Brett, you know a lot about these 5 families.
Well, I mean, the 5 families are famous. They do run the underworld in New York City to this day. You know, if you've ever heard,
Are they going to come after us?
they're not going to come after us. We are.
They're not going to come after a small podcast that doesn't even have ads.
That's true. But if they want to advertise, if they're running out of, if they need some,
We're for sale.
they need to reinvent themselves. We are open for business. So
Tell me about these 5 families, Brett.
yeah, so it's the Bonanno, the Colombo, the Gambino, the Genovese, and the Lucchese family. And the Genovese family is actually, power has shifted between these 5 families. If you've seen The Godfather, there's sort of a version of the 5 families, and The Godfather is the head of one of those families, the same type of thing. And they sort of, power will shift between them. The Genovese crime family, of which the Defeo family was, the family, like the actual family, was actually one of the more powerful of these families and sort of ran things for quite some time. And one of the reasons it's such a powerful family is it's famous in the underworld for not turning state's evidence, right? So this whole code of silence, what's the word? There's a term for it. Omerta? Is it omerta? Is that what it is? Anyways, so there's a code of silence. They stick to it. They don't turn state's evidence, and so they've actually been able to be much more sort of powerful throughout the years than some of the other ones where people have turned on each other and they've become informants and all that kind of stuff. So this was a really powerful group of people, particularly in the 70s. I mean, this was a time when the Genovese crime family is really running things in New York. And if you may recall, in the 70s and 80s, New York City was not the Disneyland that it is now. It was kind of a rough and tumble place. And these guys, they were some of the folks who were making that happen, and they were the ones making the money off of it. And so the story that Butch Defeo told was that one of the members of this crime organization was in town, and he had called him a bad name. I won't repeat it here. It's a sex act. I'll say that.
We're keeping this a family
show, so use your imagination. But he called this guy this thing, and the guy got really mad and decided he was going to kill Butch. And he sends his people, they go in, they kill the whole family with the idea of killing Butch, but he's not there. So he actually sort of survives out of, sheer luck. And initially, you got to remember, once again, the mob really feared during this period of time. I mean, this wasn't long.
It could be a believable story. They really were terrorists,
they were.
Throughout New York. So it's believable.
Yeah. I mean, this is like, John Gotti, who you've all heard of. I mean, he came to power in the mid 80s. These were powerful people, and they could have done this. I mean, they could have. And so the police initially, while I don't know how much they bought into this, they definitely took Butch into protective custody. And the sort of initial story that everybody, I'm not going to say they believed it, but they certainly gave credence to, was that the mob could have done this. And essentially what happened, and I kind of love this, is that, the folks in Amityville talked to their friends in the mob squad or whatever, and the New York police, and they talked to their people in the mob, because that's the way it is, right? And the mob said, look, we would never do this. We don't go after families. If he had done that, we would have found him and we would have killed him, but we would not have killed the whole family. It's just not what we do. And moreover...
Is that true, by the way? Just because in the movies they always make it seem like, they cut off all your fingers and they go after your wife and kids because that's what hurts you the most.
They do that in the movies.
I'm not speaking from experience. I'm not speaking from experience, clearly. I'm hiding in my closet.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. I mean, there's a couple things. Number one, his great uncle, is a high-ranking member of the Genovese crime family, right? Like, even if Butch does something really stupid and insults somebody who's really dangerous, killing his family is probably not the smartest move for you to make either, right? Because then you're going to bring down the wrath of the Genovese crime family on you. So you're just not going to do that. That's the first thing. The second thing, the mob just wants to make money. It's not personal. It's business, right? So the best way to get people to not like you and the police really after you is to kill a bunch of kids. If you just kill other people who are involved in the mob, it's kind of like, like whatever. That doesn't really matter. But you start killing kids, then you're going to have a problem. So I think the police didn't really believe they would do this. And when the mob said, look, just not our style, they were kind of like, yeah, that's true. It's not.
That's fair. But, can we just say, isn't that crazy that he was taken into, he being Butch, was taken into protective custody when really he's the one who killed all of them? I mean, it's just so twisted in so many ways.
Yeah, it really is. And this was probably, I mean, you just got to remember back to where we were. The golden age of the mob was Prohibition. And then the second golden age was probably, post-war era, post-war era into like the early 60s. And then I think you were in sort of your last golden age of the mob, where a lot of these people that you've heard of, whether it's John Gotti or whether it's the guy from Boston, whose name escapes me, who was murdered recently, or like Whitey
I
Bulger,
didn't
who was the head of the Irish
I didn't know how
mob.
to say capo regime.
Yeah, but you know what a capo regime is now, so you're in good shape.
Now I do.
Right. Yeah. So like Whitey Bulger, he takes over in the mid 70s, runs Boston through the 80s, and it's only in the 90s when he's finally run to ground and that starts to fall apart. So it was a legitimate concern. What I'm saying here is it was a legitimate concern and legitimately possible that the mob could have been involved in this, at least initially.
But as the investigation goes on, it becomes clear it's not the mob.
Right.
So what are the other theories then? How could he have done this? How could Butch have done
We
this?
talked about this a little bit earlier, and we've sort of danced around it a lot, and that's whether Dawn was involved. And one thing that is very true, and we've discussed several times, is the eternally changing story of Butch. And as we talk about Dawn and whether Dawn was involved, you're going to see that. So there's always been speculation that Dawn, who was the oldest daughter, was somehow involved in the murders. And this essentially became Butch's story. Once he moved on from the initial, it was the mob, to I did it sort of in a druggy haze and don't really remember anything, and I'm crazy and the devil made me do it and I was hearing voices. Once he moved on from that, after his conviction, after he was in jail, he started to say it was Dawn. Dawn is really the one who was driving this train. And he has a little bit to back him up.
And why does this have any credence if Dawn is actually one of the victims?
That's a good point. However, there are a few things that back it up. The first are some statements that were made by Dawn's boyfriend at the time, a William Davidge. And he said that it wasn't just Butch who was using drugs. Dawn had been using LSD and mescaline very intensely at the time. And at the time of the murders, she was kind of in a similar place to where Butch was. She had had a complete falling out with her parents. And in fact, he said that she hated them because she wanted to get out of that house. She wanted to move in with her boyfriend, and her parents wouldn't let her. And so this sort of generates the first of several stories that Butch is going to tell about Dawn. And the first one, back in sort of around 1984, he comes up with a story that he and his brother-in-law, Richard Ramondo, they came to the house and they discover that Dawn has killed everyone in the family except his mother. And his mother had killed her. So his mother kills Dawn in sort of a rage for what she's done. His mother then tries to kill herself, but she fails. And that's the first shot. And at that point, in an act of mercy, Butch actually takes the gun and shoots her. And that was the only person he killed was his mother, and it really was an act of mercy. Now, the problem with this is he concocted this with a woman who may or may not have been his wife. That's been eternally controversial about their exact relationship. Richard Ramondo does not exist, so he's not even real. So this story falls apart pretty quickly. So Butch's story evolves more, but it still circles around Dawn. By 2005.
And is Richard Ramondo based on anyone? Did he just pull that name out of thin air, or was this someone in town? Because it's pretty easy for the police to figure out someone is made up out of thin air, right?
Well, I mean, he was made up out of thin air. According to the woman who claimed to be his wife, one of Butch's friends, actually one of the friends who was at the bar when Butch gets there and comes back to help, it was obvious to her that he had sort of modeled Richard Ramondo after that guy. The way he described him, the way he looked, his general affect. I mean, that was who he was using. But I think this is just an example of sort of the weird place that Butch is in, that he would just make up out of whole cloth a brother-in-law who doesn't exist. So in 2005, his story has changed a little bit to become a little bit more realistic. Now he's saying in interviews that Dawn was angry at their parents for all the reasons we've talked about. He told her, he said, look, if you want to do this, You need to do it, not me. But for whatever reason, when they went downstairs to where his parents were asleep, Butch had the gun. He had the rifle. And he yelled at his father, "Hey, fat man, get up." That's a quote from him. And we're going to put a bunch of links on the website to some various documentaries and interviews that he's done, and you can hear him tell this story. So his father starts to get up, at which point Don's yelling at him, "Do it, do it." And Butch shoots him twice. At this point, his mother starts to get up, and she reaches towards her side table, and Butch knows that she keeps a handgun in that side table. And so he then, kind of in self-defense, is the way he doesn't say this, but it's what he's implying. He then shoots her and kills her. And then he says to Don, "Are you happy now? Are you happy now with what we've done?" And he's so upset.
And Brett, you know what's so interesting about just this part of the story? I know there's more to it. Is he's already telling a story that contradicts the evidence, right? The evidence is that no one got up. But here he's saying that his dad is starting to get up and his mom is getting up, and then he
Right.
shoots them.
And it gets worse. It gets worse with that, too. But at this point, he says that he leaves the house and he drives around town trying to figure out what to do. How are they going to deal with this? And by the time he gets back to the house, all the lights are on. And he goes inside and he goes upstairs and he finds his younger brothers and his younger sister, Allison, dead. And he runs upstairs to see what's going on with Dawn. And as he goes into her room, she grabs up the gun and tries to shoot him. But he's able to sort of wrestle with her, get the gun away from her. He throws her onto the bed, and then he says that the gun just sort of goes off in his hands and shoots her and kills her. Now, the problem with that is it also contradicts the evidence because there's simply no evidence. As you said, there's no evidence anybody got up. There's certainly no evidence of a struggle. There's no, her clothes are not ripped. They're not even displaced. She's in bed, appearing to be asleep. She has...
Right, and a point blank shot at someone looks very different than a gun going off by accident in terms of how it enters and exits the body.
There's no defensive wounds on her. There's no, scratches on him. There's nothing underneath her fingernails. Just nothing that fits with this story about Dawn. But he sticks to it. He claims that Dawn hated Allison because Allison was beautiful and she was going to be a beautiful girl, and that Dawn was very envious of her and just knew that she was going to sort of supplant Dawn in every kind of way. And then she killed the boys to cover things up, and his thought is she was going to kill me because he was the only witness, and then she could say, yeah, he did it and I killed him in self-defense. His most recent claim is that Dawn killed everybody. Like he basically was not involved in this at all, that Dawn killed the whole family. The only person he killed was her. And so the only thing that changes here is Dawn is the one who shot the father and the mother. And then they get into the fight. There's the struggle. He accidentally shoots her in the head, and it happened so fast he didn't even know what he did. And at that point, he ran out of the house, he jumped in his car, he went to get his friends at the local bar, and he sent them to the house while he stayed outside. Couple problems with that. Number one, why'd he dump the gun in the bay is the first one. Number two, if that was true, when did he have time to dump stuff in Brooklyn, his bloody clothes in Brooklyn, which he would eventually lead the police to? Obvious that's not actually what happened. Now, there are people who point to this sort of more than one gunman. Maybe it was him and Dawn. There appears to be another rifle in the canal behind the house, and people have said, and this was discovered very recently, and it's completely deteriorated. It's impossible to know whether it was involved in this or if it was just some random, even if it even was a gun, and not just like, a metal barrel that kind of looks like a gun. Impossible to know whether it was involved in this or when it went in the canal or anything, but there are people who point to that as evidence, like, oh, that's the second gun, and they dumped both guns. So, maybe Dawn was involved.
Why we don't typically see this, right? When someone's already confessed or told one story, it is not typical for them to come up with such far-ranging stories over time, over decades. Is he gaining anything except maybe media attention from these ever-changing stories, or is he just crazed and he thinks these are real, really what happened, and he's finding new truth and sharing it with the world every couple
I think
decades.
if you want to be most charitable to him, it would be that he feels so guilty about all this that he can't come to terms with the fact that he did it, right? Like he can't accept the fact that he killed his whole family for no reason. And he has developed this sort of, and he truly believes it. He's developed this fantasy where, he wasn't the bad guy. He's not the man who murdered everyone in his family and has been in jail ever since for it and will die in jail for it. And that in reality, this was just a circumstance that kind of fell upon him and it's a tragedy, but he did what he had to do. I mean, I think that's the best you can say for him is he was doing that. And like I said, he points to the boyfriend and what the boyfriend says about Don's drug use. It's probably true, and he probably knows it's true, so he knows that has the ring of truth to it. He knows that there was unburnt gunpowder on Don, which often is a sign of a shooter. It is often a sign of somebody who shoots a weapon as opposed to someone who is shot by a weapon, because when you fire a weapon, not all the gunpowder is burnt. And if you guys have ever heard of gunpowder residue, that's how it works. You shoot a gun, there's going to be unburnt gunpowder on your hands. And that's one way to know whether somebody shot a gun fairly recently. She had some of this unburnt gunpowder on her, but it was on her clothes. And the reason it was on her clothes is because although most of the gunpowder that's coming out of the barrel is burnt, if you are close enough to someone when you shoot them, there will be unburnt gunpowder on them as well. So that's what happened here. He was pretty close when he shot her. That got on her. But how he's pointing to that as sort of an inconsistency with murder. It couldn't have been murder because there's unburnt gunpowder on her. But once again,
But then you look at everything else, right? Her clothes, they're not in disarray. There's no struggle, nothing under her fingernails. We've talked about this a lot in past episodes. If there's a struggle, it's very hard to not leave behind any sort of DNA clue of it. No hair, no fiber, no, DNA underneath your skin, because that's what you use when you are defensive. You use your hands, and DNA gets on the person who's struggling to defend themselves hands, and none of that was here. Just absolutely no signs of any sort of a struggle.
no, I think that's 100% right.
This always makes me say, I mean, this whole thing is incredibly sad, but that Dawn has been such a big part of the story, when likely she was just a victim.
Right.
But she's been kind of this dark figure, whether a satanic figure handing him a gun to someone who killed the entire family, and he killed her in kind of a retribution for his family. I mean, it's quite sad, because I think all the evidence points to the fact that she was just the victim.
I think that's right. And if she was just a victim, then I think that basically leaves us with only one real possibility here.
And that is that Butch did it alone. I mean, there's no doubt that Butch was a disturbed individual. He was back then. He still is now. He's been diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, and that means he lacks empathy for others. What that means, I mean, there's going to be people who have medical degrees who understand this much better than us, but one of the telltale signs is you just cannot put yourself in other people's shoes. It's frankly, I think, one of the only ways that you can point blank kill your entire family, right? You have to lack that. There has to be that disconnect. Otherwise, kind of like you were saying, he probably can't even come to terms with it. I know many people cannot come to terms with it. You have to lack that empathy to be able to pull the trigger for people so close to you, no matter how you feel about them. And before the murders, Butch was known to have threatened to kill multiple people, actually, not just his family. One time I think he was on a trip with his hunting buddy, threatened to kill him. Another incident, he pointed a gun at his father's head, and he actually even pulled the trigger. Now, it's not clear why the gun did not fire, and I don't think, Butch knew that it wasn't going to fire. So he actually fired the gun, just for whatever reason, it didn't go off. remember where Butch was at this time during, at the time of the murders. He was drinking a fifth of scotch a day on top of regular heroin use. We've joked in the past about how Brett is a really good drinker and can hold his alcohol, but that is a lot of intoxicants in your system. He was just not in his right mind because of this antisocial personality disorder, on top of the scotch, on top of the heroin use.
And I only use heroin every other day, so.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, heroin is, whew, man, we've both had cases where we've seen heroin use, and it's one of the scarier drugs, I would say, in terms of what it does to the user. And what we do know is a week before the murders, Butch's dad, we talked about him. They were a violent family. Butch's dad actually broke a pool stick over his head while his mother told his dad, hit him again. Whatever dispute they were having, I mean, this is violent. That had to have been some force to break that pool stick over Butch's head. And then not even to have your mom back you up, but instead to say hit him again, can really start to turn the soul and get him to the place where he was. And Butch would later say that was it. That instance of when his dad broke the pool stick over his head, that was it. And he was convinced that either he was going to kill his dad or his dad was going to kill him. And it was just a matter of who was going to do it first. And ultimately, this case goes to court, and Butch admits in court on the record that he killed all 6 of his family members.
Yeah, I don't know why this case is controversial. I mean, I know.
Yeah, he said it.
I mean, he said it. He's admitted it multiple times. There's only a few versions of the story where he doesn't kill. Well, he kills somebody in every one of the stories he tells, right? I mean, even if he just kills Don, he kills somebody.
Right.
He's admitted this. There was a lot going on. We've talked about everything that was going on. I've got to think if it weren't for the Amityville horror that was to follow, that people just wouldn't think this was that controversial. I mean, he killed these people. He killed them. He shot them all. That's what he did. I don't know exactly how they didn't hear things. I don't know if he drugged them or if they didn't want to hear it or what. If they were all just deep sleepers. I'm not sure. But what I know, as certain as I can be, is that Butch Defeo murdered his family. So to the extent there was anybody who came into this thinking maybe he didn't do it, he totally did it.
Yeah, and I think he did it by himself. I think maybe drugs were involved in terms of him drugging his family members, and that's probably why they didn't get up. But I don't think anyone else was involved.
Right. I think you're 100% right. And that really only leaves us with one question. And it's the question that's sort of most appropriate for the Halloween season. And that's, what about the Amityville horror? Was it real? Was it not real? We're not going to do a whole episode on it. We're not going to dive into everything. People have strong feelings about this. A lot of people view the Amityville horror as a hoax. The Warrens were involved. There's a lot of people who think they were fraudsters. There were a lot of people, questionable folks, who were involved in that investigation. The book was written by the Lutzes after they moved out. That book was co-written with a lawyer who, during some disputes about how they were going to split the money up, said that it was all fake, it was all a hoax. They concocted it over some bottles of wine in the kitchen. People always point to that and say, see, it's a hoax, though I would just note the guy was pretty pissed off at them when this came out, so you got to wonder, is he just mad because he's not getting any money or what? But there are plenty of people who say it's a hoax. What I would direct you guys to do, if you're interested in this, watch a documentary called My Amityville Horror. It is fascinating for so many reasons, but it stars Daniel Lutz, who was one of the children who lived in that house for the 40 days or whatever that the Lutzes were there. And I will tell you, Daniel Lutz thinks this is true. He thinks something happened there. Now, Daniel's had a lot of issues, and one of the reasons that documentary is so fascinating is because it really just shows you what trauma can do to a person. And he went through so much, whether you think the Amityville horror was real or not, it's obvious that he had a very traumatic childhood, and it has followed him for the rest of his life. So it's interesting for those of you who are interested in the Amityville horror. It's interesting for those of you who are interested in sort of childhood trauma. I will say this, whether you think the place was haunted or not, I do think the Lutz family, there were some dark things going on in that family, and I don't think the Amityville home is cursed. It seems like the people who are living there now are perfectly fine. But there was a time period where you did not want to live in that house in Amityville, New York.
Right, like you said, we could do a whole show on the Lutzes, and it probably is more about the Lutzes than the actual house.
And I'm interested to hear from you guys what you think about the Lutzes, what you think about Butch Defeo, what do you think about the Amityville horror, what do you think about hauntings in general? You know, are you afraid of ghosts? Do you believe in ghosts? It's a great question for this Halloween season. Let us know if you've got any good ghost stories, if you got any good paranormal experiences.
Right, you can't leave us hanging there. You can't leave us hanging there. Do you believe in ghosts?
Do I believe in ghosts?
Yes.
I don't know, Alice. That's a tough question.
You can't ask our listeners that and not tell them yourself.
I'm not a materialist.
And I have to say, Brett loves Halloween.
This
is his
Halloween.
Jam. I mean, he is like Mr. Halloween. So, do you believe in hauntings and ghosts?
I love Halloween. I love the paranormal. I think there are things that we do not understand. And some of those things have to do with hauntings. But I've never seen a ghost, unfortunately. If you're a ghost and you're listening, I'd love to see you. Please show up in my house anytime. Don't stay. Come to visit. You got to go away. But
I just have to make clear, I'm the opposite. If you're a ghost and you're listening, please don't come. So just make clear, only Brett wants to see you.
And I'll just say, if you're a ghost and you're into electronic voice phenomenon, go ahead and talk on our podcast right now.
Brett.
Okay, I'll listen to that later and see whether or not the ghost spoke to us. And if they did, I will highlight it for you guys afterwards. But anyway, we want to hear your stories. We want to hear your thoughts, criticisms, comments about this case or any of the others that we've looked at. prosecutorspod@gmail.com. Prosecutorspod on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. prosecutorspodcast.com is our website, and you can find us basically anywhere people hang out on the internet. Reddit, YouTube, now on Patreon. But yeah, let us know what you're thinking. Keep sending us those great suggestions. We love them. We're looking into all kinds of new cases, putting stuff together for you guys coming up. Well, Alice, do you have any other comments on the Amityville horror or your own personal ghost stories?
No personal ghost stories, except if you love Halloween, I'm the opposite. I'm a big baby, and all of these things make my skin crawl. So I can't wait for the holiday season to come. Maybe we can do some cheery murders.
Yes, Santa Claus killings. Well, I hope the rest of all the listeners out there, your skin is crawling as well, because that's what we're going for. And that's the end of our discussion of the Amityville horror. We'll be back next week with a new spooky case to fit this spooky season. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. I like the one guy. Did you see the guy who tweeted that he likes our show because we don't go on tangents? I was like...
And then someone else was like, it's all tangents.
Yeah, I know. I was like, thank you.
But also, I disagree that we go on tangents. If someone doesn't understand...
Oh, there you go.
If you think it's a tangent,
that just means
you
you're
don't
not
get
smart
it.
enough to listen.
Not smart enough, but you don't get what we're trying to get at. trying to be mean. I'm just saying.
Just saying all those 1-star people are stupid. Anyway. Okay. All right. You ready
Just
to do
3
this
and
thing?
under. Just 3 and under. I'm so ready. Let's go. Let's talk about how you're living in a hotel.
Yes.
And we're living in a hurricane right now. It's 2020, man. 2020.
Rough.
It is certainly rough.